Hello everyone. Today I will be showing you a crazy game, an unbelievable game that was played with my fellow opponent and my friend. So let's get into it. So for this game, I actually prepared the Spanish opening. So as you can see, e4 was played, e5, knight f3, and knight c6. By the way, this is me and this is my opponent, if you're wondering. Bishop e5, the Spanish or the Ruy Lopez, and he plays knight to f6, attacking this pawn. And it's also known as the Berlin defense. I defended the pawn and he developed his bishop to c5. I took his knight, he took back. And I castled. I should have taken this pawn, primarily because it was a free pawn and I just completely missed this, but anyways, he pinned my knight to the queen, so I can't take this pawn anymore. And I tried kicking his bishop out. Bishop drops back to e6. Apparently, it was better for him to maintain the pin. And for example, if he dropped back, and if I play something like this, I've overextended a tiny bit too much. Now I've opened my king a lot. See what I mean? My king doesn't really have a lot of mobility. So instead my opponent drops back to e6, which was a mistake. And I played pawn to d3, intending to go here. And again, I should have taken this pawn. And he defended the pawn that I was meant to take a while ago. So I pinned his knight to the queen. And he played h6, intending to kick out my bishop, maybe to like all the way back here or all the way here. But I took because I just wanted, because I actually prepared a sequence of moves. I said, okay, if he takes the queen like this, I'm gonna play d4, and if he takes, I won't take with the knight, but I'm gonna take with the queen and look for a queen trade, which is exactly what happened in the game. Pawn to d4, pawn takes on d4, and queen takes on d4. And then we had a transformation and a queen trade. He attacked, my opponent attacked my rook, and I moved the rook out of the way. He castled long, and I had a discovered attack on this bishop. Now two pieces are attacking this bishop. My opponent moved this bishop out of the way, and we had a rook trade. I dropped my knight back to attack this bishop, and obviously my opponent wanted to keep the bishop pair. Rook d1, intending to go for a rook trade. He took with the rook, which was apparently a blunder, but I don't necessarily understand. Taking with this knight is slightly inaccurate. Why? Because you weaken this pawn. So that's why I played knight on e3, taking the rook. And he played pawn to g5, trying to launch an attack on this king, maybe with moves like this or like this. Pawn to b3, looking to go pawn to a4, launching attack on his king. And he played pawn to f5. I took on f5. He took back with the bishop. So yeah, it was actually better for me to play this move, because after takes, white is up a bishop. White is up a pawn. White is up a pawn and is definitely winning. But then instead this was played. a4, which was a blunder, and it was the only blunder I made in the game. Bishop takes pawn and b4. And black is completely winning here. Pawn to b6. Maybe intending to go here, here, or here, and just launch an attack, or even here possibly. Instead, I played b5, and he played pawn to c5, not taking this pawn, which was slightly better. Why? Because if he took, and he took again, he could have brought his king over here, and he could have pushed this pawn, and this pawn's never going anywhere. So that's why it was better for him to take. Instead, my opponent pushed. I brought the king to f1, intending to go here and just push these pawns. He played. My opponent played a6, intending to go here, and also if I take like this, here's this move. So this actually looks like a free pawn, but it's not, because after here, my opponent checks me and he wins the pawn back. So that's exactly what happened in the game. He gave me a check and he got the pawn back. I played knight to d5, intending to reroute my knight possibly to here and then here, and just pressure this pawn. He played king to b7, which is not really a good move, because now if he plays a move like pawn to b5, his bishop has no moves. But yeah, that's the bad thing about king to b7. But I think my opponent was also trying to go here and try to kick out my knight. Pawn to c3, just having the goal to have these two knights well coordinated and just defending each other. But it was definitely better, according to the computer, to go here. But instead, pawn to c3 was played. He took, and I took back. And he made a huge blunder, because now his bishop is trapped. Yeah, it went from minus 4.5 to plus 5. So now white is completely winning here. My knight's been kicked out, obviously, and I drop it back to c3 again. Apparently, it was better if I attack the king and went here and attack these two pawns. But again, king to b6. Pawn to g3, intending to go pawn to f4, king to a5. King to a5, I mean, that's somewhat a bad move, because it's definitely better to go here first. Why? Because you can go here, maybe kick this knight out, and you don't have to spend an extra move moving this pawn. But anyways, that wasn't played. Knight goes to e4, pressuring these two pawns. My opponent obviously didn't blunder a pawn. He defended it with king to b4, and I launched an attack, pawn to f4. He didn't. My opponent didn't take. It's definitely much better to push here, because after here takes. I'm just much faster than his pawn, and my opponent has to spend an extra move moving out of the way. But I actually took on this pawn. My opponent took back, and I pushed. My opponent took on h4, and I took on h4. My opponent pushed, and the best move in this position is to sacrifice your knight in a stylish fashion. My opponent took back, and I pushed. I pre-moved this entire thing because I had low time and he had way more time than I did. I promoted to a queen, and there's a specific technique to this endgame where your opponent is very close to promotion, and it's called repetitive check. So you check the king, and when the king hides in front of its pawn, you bring your king forward, but instead I just had a missed one. It was a missed one. Apparently king to e2 was good as well. As soon as the king comes out, though, you start to give it repetitive check. You come forward, you give a repetitive check, you come forward, the king goes back, and it just brought the king, and it's game over. Apparently, the computer says it's mate in 3. So yeah, it's mate in 3, but I missed mate in 3, which is completely fine. But now it's mate in 1. The king is forced to go here, and this is just a mate, which is exactly what happened in the game. And I had 0.8 seconds left on the clock, and my opponent had 23 seconds. So my opponent could have won because of me just running out of time. But anyways, that is an incredible game. My opponent was completely winning, but my opponent threw the match and I just had a huge advantage. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have a great day and see you next time.